It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Michael Freudman.
Guy,
we're here in your beautiful apartment in Givatayim in Israel. And I must say, I think you are the youngest 85-year-old I have ever met.
Well, this was the first time you say Shechiano.
Okay, so you were born in Belgium.
I was born in Belgium. I was number 2. My eldest brother David, he was 3 years older than me. It was myself, 36, and then my younger brother Eddie, who was born in 1940. And when we in February 40, and we escaped in May 1940. So he was a baby, and that was a family then. And then 2 brothers were born after the war in England. Right, one was Joey Freudman, and he's still alive. And the youngest one, Roger, unfortunately passed away a few years ago. He was a bachelor. And Joey lives in Onana. He's got a big family, grandchildren, fine. That's the family. So we escaped from Belgium in 1940, as I said, with a long odyssey which took us 2 months to get from Antwerp to England, which we should probably go into detail further on. I grew up in England, in London. We came to London when we escaped. We came first to London to my mother's brother's house, Mr. Sever, and so we lived in Totteridge, which was a bit out the side. But as the Germans bombed, and one bomb fell outside the fence and didn't explode, and one fell in the garden. He had a very big garden, actually, a few acres, and a tennis court, and one bomb fell in the tennis court and exploded. And after that, we evacuated to the country. We lived in a small village, also the Sebers, my family, my uncle's family. We all moved out to a little village called in Hertfordshire, Newnham, and we lived in the squire's house. The squire was away in the army, and we lived in his house. After a year or so, we moved to Letchworth, which was a town, fairly smallish town, about an hour and a half train ride to London, and a community was set up there, actually a very thriving Jewish community, which was a Rabbi Sassoon there, who was a very prominent Sephardi rabbi, and a good community, very thriving, which after the war died out again, although there was a few years, there were still people coming there. And we lived there. I grew up there at first, so we moved to London at the end of the war, I think in 1946. My father bought a house there, and I grew up in London. I went to the Hasmonean school. I did finish matric, advanced level, and then I came for a year to Israel. I went to the Hebrew University, did a year because I wanted to get to know Israel a bit. And as I had a place in University College in London, I kept it for a year. I put off the studies in London for a year. I came to Israel, which was excellent. I had a great time and really got to know the country and everything. And in fact, my father bought me a Jeep, and we had a Jeep. And at that time, hardly anybody had cars here. And so we had a good time. I knocked around all over the place, and a place which today no problem, like En-Gedi, which right off the track. To go there, you had to have a military escort, and it was pretty wild and hairy, but it was a good time. And I knew that I was going to come back to live in Israel. I was quite positive. In fact, I made up my mind when I was 12, I think, when it was the Mechelmet HaShichrur, War of Independence. For me, that was it. And probably the influence of the war and of being refugees and seeing what happened to Jews where they were not defended and had no country of their own. So that I saw fighting Jews, and that convinced me. So I came to Israel after I finished my degree in economics and international relations, and I joined the army. I was in the Nachal, and I was a Nachal parachutist. I was a sergeant instructor. And then actually I did 20 years or more of Miluim, and took part in the 6-Day War, took part in the Yom Kippur War, the Shtachim, you name it, Gaza, and all that. And so I finished that after. I stayed in the army, in the Miluim, even though I worked in security for 35 years. and security and defense matters, intelligence. But I said I'll stay in the army until I'll go to Miluim as long as it doesn't disturb my work. So, and I managed to stay till I was about 40 or something.
Amazing.
Yeah. And actually, in the army, in the wars, I got in one war. I'm not talking about the ordinary activities that I did in Gaza, and I did the West Bank, I did everything. The Golan under the Syrians, still Syrian Heights. But in the wars, I got one side. I got to Quneitra, up to the Ramah with the helicopter assault there, which was towards the end of the Six-Day War. First we did the what's now Kfish Al Shalosh Road. We did that along there. We ran up against a few Egyptian commandos who had been left in the area and so on. And I finished there, and then they took us up north, and just towards the end of the war they helicoptered us up to the heights. In the Yom Kippur War, I got as far as the other side of the canal. In fact, when the Swedish troops came on, that was the last day I was in the canal area, and I came back then after that. Anyway, so I married. My father-in-law, that's his sketch that I did of him over there, but he was actually, I knew who to marry because he was the biggest expert on prothesis and so on in Israel. And he's also an interesting story. They were refugees from Germany, they came before the war, he and his wife. They weren't married yet, but they married here in Israel. They married on the roof of the Ethiopian consulate, actually. We have pictures even of it, photos in Jerusalem. And he studied medicine, but his studies were interrupted by the Nazis, and he knew he couldn't finish his studies in there, so he did a course in building prothesis, and he came to Palestine and Israel, and that's when he started working in it. So in Tel Ashom, he was one of the first. He did all the War of Independence invalids and so on. He knew them, and he was in the end, he was the Inspector General, let's say, of the rehab or the rehab institutions here in Israel. So I knew who to marry because that was it. Anyway, there's also a story. He went back to Germany because his studies were interrupted, and he didn't finish his title of doctor. Then he went back when he was about 40. He went back to Munich, and he completed his studies, and he's sitting there in a class with people of 18 and 19 and so on.
Wow, that's amazing.
He was a doctor in the army. He was a rehab doctor in the army in Tel Ashom, and yeah.
But Mickey, your story is actually unbelievable. Can you tell us a little bit about your grandparents and
my
your family, where you came from?
Yeah. My grandfather was from Czechoslovakia, and my grandmother was from Poland. Actually, when we left Belgium, we had Czech passports, and I'd never been to Czechoslovakia. My father had only visited Czechoslovakia, but in Belgium, when you were 18 at the time, I don't know what the law is now, you could choose if you wanted to take the nationality of your parents or the nationality of the country you were born in Belgium. My father, for some reason, decided to be Czech, which in 1940 wasn't a brilliant passport at all. However, this is the passports here.
And these are the original passports?
Yeah, I got the original passports. And there's a story here with the passport, because I looked at them after, let's say, 40 years and so on, and I discovered things about our escape from Belgium which were made clear when I saw the stamps in the passport. Actually, I'll show you this. This is my father. This is my father.
It's amazing. And the other passport is that of your mother?
My mother was born in Riga, and the family came to England when she was 2, and so she was British. But what happened was that at the time in England, by the way, later on, she got Czech. Yeah, she took a Czech. She had to give up her British passport. In those days, if you married a foreigner, you had to give up your British passport. I've got a little story about that with my aunt, my mother's sister.
Can we just have a look at a picture of your mum?
Yeah. She was a good-looking lady, actually. One second.
It's amazing how you kept these passports.
I'll show you. I've got a story there in stamps. I'll show you because it's connected with the war, and I learned from it. 50 years after, I learned from it still.
Yeah, it says here, born in Riga. Amazing.
It's my bar mitzvah, by the way.
This we'll go into later.
Okay.
And this is a picture of your grandfather?
That's my grandfather, Joseph Freudman. He was a great Talmid Chacham. Here, this is him. He was a great Talmid Chacham. And Rabbi Sassoon, I don't know if you've heard of Rabbi Sassoon,
sure.
but he was a leading scholar, Sephardi scholar, a very rich family. Those Sassoons who were international traders. They were Iraqis, but they lived in Bombay. And he lived in Letchworth. He was his family with Indian servants and all that, and was a very, very colourful figure. I mean, he used to invite the kids on Guy Fawkes Day for a bonfire and that. And he used to learn with my grandfather every day. And he, in fact, wrote what's written on his Matzeva, my grandfather, Rabbi Sassoon wrote in that. No, there's the same picture there.
So, Mickey, can I just ask, what is your first recollection growing up in Belgium? And which
I haven't got much recollection. I was three when I left. I was 3.5 when we left. I vaguely remember a Purim party there, sometime just before the war.
And were you living in Antwerp?
In Antwerp, yeah. And the whole family. I mean, there were 5 brothers and sisters or more, 5, 6, 7 brothers and sisters of my father. They had most of them worked together. One of them made Aliyah to Israel into Palestine, and in 1936 or something, and he lived in Tel Aviv, Frischman Street. When the war broke out, for some reason, he decided to go back to Belgium, and he went back to Belgium. And he was the only one who was caught in the end by the Germans, and he died not in Auschwitz. Anyway, he died in the camps. But they lived for a short while in Spa with Refect, with Romy. He knew that he was at the bar mitzvah of the brother of the son of this uncle of mine, my cousin, the oldest boy, had his bar mitzvah. He's another story, by the way, because he disappeared after the war. Nobody knows what happened to him. But I don't want to start running over too many, gets out of order. But he was the only one who was actually, there were 2 brothers who couldn't get out. One of them survived, he lived as a goy, as a non-Jew in France. This other one, Ferdy, he went to France, then went back to Belgium, and he was caught, and he died in Majdanek. And he had, there were 2 twins, twins, youngest ones, and the older boy disappeared. After the war, because a cousin of mine who was in the American Army, who also escaped from Belgium. 2 years later, he's in the intelligence, the American Army. The Americans had a whole project of recruiting refugees from who spoke German and other languages, and they called them the something boys from the camp in which they had come back in my mind. He was an officer in intelligence. He got back to Belgium after the Normandy invasion, and he met the family there. He met the boy at the time, and this older boy. He said he's going to go and find his fortune in Belgian Congo. He wrote to my father. My father wanted to bring him to England because he brought the other ones, the 2 younger ones as well, to England. And after the war, we tried to get them out. He tried to get them out while in the war. They were hiding in occupied France. First it was unoccupied, then it was occupied. And a week before the Germans moved down into unoccupied France, my father managed to get visas for the children to come to England. But it was too late. They couldn't get them, because before that the Americans had they had delegations there, or representatives, and all the Red Cross and so on. You could get them, but there wasn't enough time to get these visas to them. There were visas for the kids only. Anyway, so one was caught, the other one survived. But that's it. But Romeo tells about being at the bar mitzvah of this boy who disappeared, right? So that things, which was quite amazing. Actually, I wanted to hear from Romy about that, and he didn't. He said it was recorded or whatever. Maybe I could get it. But about the bar mitzvah, and he was interviewed by a lady here not long ago as well. I didn't get. I sent her an email, but she didn't answer me. Anyway, so I'm a bit meandering, but we were in Letchworth in the war.
No. So can I just before when you how come your parents decided to leave Belgium? Did they see the writing on the wall?
Okay, I'll tell you how. First of all, people usually say, why didn't they leave? Why didn't people leave earlier? They know that nobody believed that the Germans would conquer the whole of Europe. Because there was this famous Maginot Line, the very huge French army. They were going to stop them, and I've got magazines here from the war, and you see the language before the Germans made their attack. Yeah, you know, the people were making fun of them and their weapons and this and that, and there's this fantastic Maginot Line and the huge French army. Nobody believed that the Germans would be able to crack it. So on the 10th of May 1940, the day the Germans invaded, my parents decided to leave.
It was the day they invaded Belgium.
It was the day that they invaded. Now they started in the east of Belgium, in the east of Belgium, because that was a defence line there, and they started there. They didn't get the first to Antwerp. My brother David, my oldest brother who died, who lived in Canada, who was 3 years older than me, always said that he saw German parachutists in Antwerp on that night. They were dropping. But there's no military record of German parachutists they were in Holland, and they were in Belgium, not there, on the front, where they captured the fortresses, the Belgian fortresses, the Eben something fortress canal on the border with Germany. They were active there, but in Antwerp itself, I've not found any record. And I'm a bit of a military historian. I've checked a lot of things. I haven't found that there were German parachutists in there, but there was a big, huge panic. I have a letter here which my mother wrote on the way from France. This is a letter she wrote this on the 5th of June 1940, was in France, right? And she said there was a terrific panic. We left on the famous Friday of May 10th in the afternoon. That's Erev Shabbat, right? And we were datim. It was too late to get to La Panne. We stayed in Knock at the Ringers afterwards, but we left because what's happening in Ukraine? There's a war.
They stayed at the Ringers?
Sorry?
The Ringer family?
The Ringers had a restaurant, a hotel or something.
There's a family in Jerusalem.
Maybe.
From
Ringers, yeah, well, they were quite well known, as far as I remember.
And can I have a look at and this is the original letter?
This is the original letter she wrote. What happened was she writes this letter in Cognac, June the 5th. June the 5th, the war started 10th of May, we're still in France. June the 5th is not far from when Paris was already captured by the Germans. We were in France when France capitulated. We were moving down. My father, it was incredible. My father had a car, a Pontiac, which the French confiscated from us in Cognac. They confiscated it. We were stuck there. And he had rheumatic fever for a while. And we're stuck. It's an incredible story. He's sitting in the garden recuperating, and suddenly a convoy of cars come and stop there. And there's one man gets out and he says, "Freudman, what are you doing here?" A Belgian official from Antwerp, who was in the Chamber of Commerce in Belgium, who knew my father, because my father dealt in rough diamonds, industrial diamonds, not in polished. And so he had dealings with him in the Chamber of Commerce of Antwerp. My father says, "We're trying to escape." So he says, "Come with us. We're a small convoy of Belgian officials. And we're meeting a small Belgian boat in Bayonne, which is down here, Bayonne, which is near the Spanish border here. Okay? Cognac is here. So this is near the border here. So he says to us, come with us. We've got a small pilot boat going to Lisbon, which is over here. So we get onto this, we pack up and we go with them. And we get to,
your mom wrote this letter before?
She wrote this while we were in Cognac, and she says we're in a small house here and so on, which I found on the Google because I found a form which my grandfather had deposited some possessions in a bank in Cognac, and it's written there the address that we're living in at Cognac. I looked it up, and it fits what my mother wrote. There's a nice garden up, and opposite a forest, a woods and so on, exactly. And I saw the house on picture. I found it on the Google.
I just want to show that this is the original. It's amazing that you kept the original letter.
Incredible.
This is the original letter. And your mum writes it in English?
She was English. My mother was English, remember? She was born, she grew up in England. She was
and this is June the 5th?
June the 5th. Now,
and who was the letter written to?
This is the amazing thing. It seems that the post worked in at that time, even though there was war going on. So she wrote this to her family in London, to my grandmother, and my grandfather was my grandmother, and her sister, my mother's sister, and brother. It's very odd because I have another letter which my father wrote to a friend in Bordeaux while we're on the way. While we're on the way, he writes to a friend in Bordeaux asking him, should we come to Bordeaux? Is there service for Orthodox Jews? Is there some more? The man says, don't come to Bordeaux. Go to Spa. Now, luckily we didn't go to Spa, because Spa came under German, no, sorry, he said, go to Vichy. Go to Vichy. Vichy became a center of the French administration and the pro-Nazi administration. If we'd gone to Vichy, we wouldn't be alive probably anymore. And for whatever reason, my father didn't go to Vichy. But we went down south. He continued going down south. Okay? So anyway, going back.
Do you remember this?
I remember being bombed by the Germans on the way, on a boat. And I'll show you a photo of something very similar. However, let's go back a minute to leaving Antwerp. George, was told by his mother or by whoever, or he doesn't remember quite because he was a small boy, wasn't born then even. He was born after many years. That his father warned the family to leave Antwerp because he came from Austria, and he was an Austrian. He married his father. I'm sorry, but my second cousin. And so they say he warned the family about Hitler because he came from Austria and he saw what happened in Austria with Anschluss and all that, and so he understood better than everybody else. But come on, people already knew Hitler had already been in Poland. They already captured Poland. They knew what the Germans were. There was enough written about what the German people didn't know yet about extermination completely, but they knew the Germans were no Greek lovers of the Jews. So not because of that. My mother, I never heard as a boy, and also never heard a word about his father warning people about them. It's something that came up, and I think in a time it was distorted or whatever, because it's not based on anything that I ever heard from anybody. And I met my father's brothers who came to England afterwards to visit, and I read all that had been written, and my parents and everything. Nobody ever said that the father. I mean, they understood that the Germans were invading. I mean, you don't have to have much imagination to. I mean, there were millions of refugees then on the roads. Anyway, where should we go back to? Because I'm.
So now you're leaving Antwerp. You decide to leave.
Okay.
Can I just ask? Do you remember your house in Antwerp?
I've been back, so it's not quite fair. I've been back there. We had an apartment. We had an apartment. My grandfather had another apartment not far from that as well. The Fecht family also had an apartment. I don't really remember the house, to tell the truth.
But you were small.
I was 3.5. Yeah. I mean, I remember.
But the bombing you remember?
I remember, and I had another one, and another thing I had as well, which I remember. I had a flashback, which is very odd. When we got to Bayonne, to the port, there was a line of wagons, of train wagons, standing on the quay, and the whole port was abandoned as far as we could see. There were no officials or police or whatever and so on, but there was this little boat that we had to get to. It was a Belgian pilot boat, which is also another interesting story, which I looked into only a couple of years ago. This boat never was in my conscious very much. This boat that we went from Lisbon, yes, but not this one. Anyway, so we get there to the port, and there's this line of wagons between us and the boat. So we had to crawl under the wagons to get to the boat. And my mother held my brother, Eddie, in his arms. This one here. This is Edmund. This is the daughter of the uncle who died. She's in California today.
That was your brother Eddie? That's
my brother Eddie, yeah. And my mother crawled with him, holding him. Now, a few years ago, I never wanted to go very much to see the camps in Poland. But we had a group of ex-colleagues of mine from my office who organized to go to Poland, to the camps. And we went, and I said, okay, I'll go, because it was all with people I know, and I said, I'll go and I'll say Kaddish and El Malach Hamid for my uncle as well. So I went, and now we were in Lodz. In Lodz, a train station has been made a museum of the Shoah relics of the
deportation where they were.
Yeah, and they left a wagon there on the line.
I remember.
And you could go in. And as I was going to go into the wagon, we had this loudspeaker thing which the guide was talking with, and I had it attached to my belt or whatever. And as I got in the wagon, it fell in between the platform and the wagon. And I asked a friend if he could go down and pick it up. And as he went down, I suddenly have a flashback of my mother crawling under the train in France, in Bayonne. Very odd. I hadn't thought about it at all. Came back to me suddenly. See my mother crawling under the... Anyway, so... Anyway, that was shall we carry on with that? Because this was a whole odyssey.
So you had to crawl under the wagon.
We had to crawl under the wagons. Yeah. We got to get to the boat. The whole thing of our exit to Belgium was incredible. I mean, people didn't know where to go. In fact, and my father just probably wanted to get as far away as he could from the Germans, and maybe to get somewhere which was neutral. He wanted to go to the States, in fact. But what happened was this. We got on this little Belgian boat, which I'll tell you about at some later on or whatever, because I looked it up. I never looked it up. It had a number. It was called LB something. LB 30.
You're crawling under, and then you managed to get onto the boat.
We got onto the boat. Yeah. We get out of there and we get to Lisbon. Now we didn't get offshore in Lisbon. we stayed on the boat, and the day we got, what happened, we got visas to go to England. How come? We're on a boat. We're foreigners. None of us were English. We had Czech passports, remember. My mother wasn't even English anymore. What happened was that somebody from the boat, a crew or something, got offshore and could bring provisions and messages and send cables or whatever for the people. And he must have sent to my family in England that we were in Lisbon. So my uncle, I had an uncle who was well connected and very well off and so on, and a lawyer, came to Israel afterwards, and he bought the house with Lord Ziv in Tel Mond. His name was Sam Seba, very prominent member of the Jewish community in England and here. Anyway, he hears that we're in Lisbon, because none of us spoke to him. My parents didn't speak to them. There was somebody from the crew went off and sent us. Now, in England, they'd set up an office called the Office of Strategic Economy, or Warfare, War Economy. And I had a cousin, a second, third cousin, who worked there. By the way, he was afterwards in the army, and he got the military medal, and he fought in Africa, and he fought in Italy, and he died after the war in a skiing accident in Austria. He fell into a crevice. But he was working in this Ministry of Economic Warfare, it was called. So my uncle says to him, tell them that this diamond merchant who's got a lot of rough goods which are good for the war economy, because they use them to machine tools ahead. Tell him he's got all these diamonds with him. He also had an office in England, by the way, before that. And it'd be good for the war economy if he comes to England, if these diamonds don't fall into the hands of the Germans or the French or whatever. So, this cousin, Louis Belinki, goes to the Foreign Office, and they send and he tells them this, and they send a cable to the British consul in Lisbon saying, go and find these people, because at that time all the refugees were knocking on the doors of the consulates and they weren't letting them in. It was very hard to get a visa, except for one of the Hasidei Umot in Bordeaux, where the Portuguese consul Mendoza, he gave lots and lots. And some of my family got from him as well, but not us. And the refugees were being shown away or being given a hard time. And here comes the British consul, comes onto the boat, and he says, I want to see your documents. So he takes the document, and he said, my father says, now this is incredible, my father was a refugee, he was running away from the Nazis. He says to the British consul, I don't want to go to England. The Germans are going to get there. I want to go to America. Can you imagine? They're all begging to get visas, and he says, I don't want a visa. The consul, using some kind of ruse, asked my father to go and find something in the cabin or whatever, and he grabs the documents, our passports. And he says, I'm going to give you visas. I'm going to go to the consulate, and I'm going to give you a visa. And now, all this sounds like maybe it's a fairy tale. But a couple of years ago, I looked again in the passport. From time to time, I look at it. And what do I see? One second. Here. The whole story is here.
United Kingdom.
One.
And British consulate in Lisbon. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's he written here?
Can you read it?
Yeah. It says here, going from the boat that we were on, the Belgian boat, to the British boat, Ulster Prince. This was a Belgian boat, the stamp of the Belgian boat, MLB 16. And the same day, we've got Ulster Prince. So we got off from one boat to the other. We never got on shore to Lisbon. Okay? It's on the same day, and we got also the visa. Now, he covered himself, the consul. He wrote here, "See Arfar," that's a Foreign Office telegram from June 27th, 1940, from Ministry of Economic Warfare to British Consulate. He covered his ass. He was saying that why did the British consul give these foreigners visas? So, to cover himself probably, he wrote this in. Now, I never noticed that. 50 years went by, I never noticed it. Because I was trying to figure out how did all this happen. By the way, he grabs these passports, and my grandfather shouts, "Ganef, Ganef!" Yeah, he says to say he's stealing, but anyway, he says, "I'll come back, I'll give you the visas." And that's the story. And we got this one-time visa to England. Now, MLB 16, which I only found out about 2 years or 3 years ago. I never looked interested. Ulster Prince, I got interested in because it was a cross-channel steamer, and I looked up, it was sent by the Admiralty to bring off British nationals and others from Lisbon. I found it. And no one else did I find. And this is connected up with the Australians and New Zealanders capturing Beersheba in 1917, because every year there's a commemoration, and I'm a bit of I'm a historian also of the First World War, and I'm connected with the Society of the Preservation of the History of the First World War in Palestine, and I do trips and everything. And at one ceremony 2-3 years ago, I meet the New Zealand consul. She's a very nice lady who's actually, she stays in, she's a area consul, and she visits Israel as well. She's actually stays us in Turkey. She's resident in Turkey, but so she comes to visit downtown. There's different commemoration services here for New Zealanders as well, who fell in the First World War, who had battles here. And I see her in Beersheba, and I go to this big ceremony in Beersheba where there's all the New Zealanders, Australians, and veterans, and God knows what. And she's wearing this Maori cloak, very nice, with a row of medals here. So I went up to her after the ceremony. I said to her, I introduced myself, and I said, "Are these medals yours?" She says, "No, they're 2 medals, 2 VCs. One of a relative of hers, another one a friend of hers."
It's a Victoria Cross.
Of a family. It's the Victoria Cross, 2 of them. And I say, who's are they? She says, "Well, one's a relative of mine, and the other was a friend of his." And I said, "Where did they get that?" What did he say? He says his name. I said, "What was his name?" He says, "This and this." I said, "Oh, he got twice a Victoria Cross, once in North Africa, once in Greece." Oh, yeah. For a second now, I can't remember the name, but I've got his name, and I've got the material on him. I remember him very well. He was a well-known school. I've got volumes of the Second World War called, I've got them over there, a couple of them. Weekly or every 2 weeks came out a journal of the war, with all the fronts and the home front and everything, who got medals and that, and he's in there. Charles Upper. Yeah, she says to me, his name is Upper. I said, "Charles?" She almost fainted. I mean, this Israeli in Beersheba knows about Charles Upper. Anyway, he got a VC twice. And I stayed in contact with her after. I sent her pictures of which I had of her, and we corresponded a bit about the Second World War and about other things. Very nice lady. She was here about a month ago also for a ceremony here near Rishon, and I met her and we talked and everything. I came to the ceremony. It was very nice. But she told me about this relative of hers who got the VC in Greece, in South Greece, when the British sent troops from North Africa, when the Germans invaded Greece, 1941 as well, invaded Greece, and the British sent troops and to help the Greeks. Didn't help them very much because the Germans captured, moved down. But one big battle was in Crete, which the Germans captured, but they did a huge airborne operation, but they never did another one afterwards. And not that size, because they had so many losses that they never had a big major airborne operation again. But anyway, I tell them what happened. And so I sent the material and so on, and all this happened down in Kalamata, where he was actually fighting Kalamata, which is Greece. And I look up a bit. I got interested in this campaign. I look it up on the Google and stuff, and I suddenly see a photo of a boat burning. It says the Ulster Prince, the same boat that took me from Lisbon.
Amazing.
And what happened? It ran aground. The British sent ships to evacuate the troops from there. There were also Palestinians, by the way, there. Jewish Palestinians and so on. They sent a number of boats, a large number of boats, to evacuate the troops from there before the Germans destroy them or capture them. And this boat was also sent, the Ulster Prince. It was sent there. It ran aground on the rocks there. And the next day, the German aircraft, they bombed it, destroyed it. And I said, I felt something, this is the boat that took me from Lisbon. Incredible. I never really got so interested in a Greek campaign. And I started looking it up and this and that. And I see this boat burning, the boat that took us. Yeah. The history, it never leaves you.
Never incredible.
Never leaves you.
Did your parents not want to get off the boat in Lisbon? Because there were quite a few Jews that actually did stay in Lisbon for a short period of time.
My uncle, one of my uncles, was in Lisbon at the same time. One didn't know from the other. He got to the States. He got to the States. No, they dispersed. Look, when the war started, when the invasion of Belgium started, the brothers dispersed. And the sisters. One sister already lived, two sisters lived abroad before. One was in Canada, one was in Brazil. All the rest was still in Belgium. So, two didn't manage to escape, all right? One survived the war, the other one I said no. The one who stayed with the Fets, with Romy and that. The others all got out via Lisbon. But they had money, so they flew, some flew out with the American Clipper. They paid, my uncle, one of them, he paid to go out. I mean, he could pay, he had the money. Portugal was neutral, so there were still flights going between the States and Portugal, so he got out. They were there at the same time as us, we didn't know. In fact, they stayed there even after we got out. They were still there. Another one or two went out with a Swedish boat with that boy who was in the American Army afterwards in the intelligence. He got out with them with his father. That was most. And some of them got out with Susan Mendoza. They got visas. I've got a cousin in the States who does a lot of family stuff, and he's a member of the Susan Mendoza Foundation, in fact. And so we got all the names of all the family and cousins and so on who got out by the Portuguese consul. Anyway, so I said, so this, I read this and I never really looked at it. Now the little Belgian boat, so the Ulster Prince I got interested in because it was a big boat. This other one didn't even have a name, it just had numbers and so. And I started looking it up. And this little tugboat was part of a number of Belgian and French boats going back and forth between Belgium and England. They were taking the bullion of the Belgian treasury to England before that. These boats are going around the harbours. They're suddenly doing cross-channel stuff. And I found the order of it. In fact, it was attached after that to a French flotilla near Bordeaux. Verdun. They joined the French flotilla, whose commander, by the way, later on was executed by the Germans because he was in the underground. After he finished going on the boats, he was part of the Maquis of the underground against the Germans' resistance, and they shot him. And this boat, and there were a number of little boats. After doing this cross-channel stuff, they were sent to Lisbon, except were sent to Verdun, which is near Bordeaux. And I found the order that all of them were sent to North Africa, to Spain, to stay for the duration of the war, because they shouldn't be confiscated by the Germans or by the French, pro-German. But except for our boat, which is said was sent to Lisbon to take off people, to not Lisbon, it was sent to to Bayonne to take people to Lisbon. So what probably happened was we were on that boat for a couple of days or a few days before we got onto the other boat, because there's some problem with the dates. But I want to stress again, we got out when Paris had already fallen to the Germans, and the German army got that into our area maybe a day or 2 days after we left. The German army itself. Okay.
And if you would have stayed there, it would have been too late.
If we wouldn't have got on that little boat, if we hadn't met the Belgians, my father's sitting in the garden. He's not by chance.
It's all min hashamayim. It's all
incredible. Incredible.
It's miracles. It's a miracle.
I said, Bill Freudman, what are you doing here? Can you imagine, out of the millions of refugees who were riding around?
This
was a convoy. Now, I think
the officer, he wasn't Jewish.
No, he was from the Chamber of Commerce. It was a guy.
Your father had a good relations.
Yeah. He had business relations with them.
And I'm sure your father was very friendly, and I'm sure they got on well.
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, if we hadn't gone there, we wouldn't be here today, probably.
Unbelievable.
Now, by the way, on the way to Glasgow, we sailed the boat, took us from Lisbon, took us to Glasgow. Okay, it was one of the worst periods in the English Channel. The Germans were sinking, both by aircraft and submarines. Thousands of tons of, I'm not exaggerating, thousands of tons of ships were being sunk in that British-English Channel.
And you were sailing?
And I was bombed up. That's one of the things that I remember. I was so terrified. The Germans had a attack aircraft called the Stuka. And the Stuka, it died, it had a whine. Now that stayed with me all my life, because they attacked. I was so terrified, and a Lascar sailor, Lascar, the Indian from India, that was sailing on the boat, he picks me up and holds me. I see my parents over the side, and I'm terrified as this German aircraft is bombing us. But they missed, because I'm here, right? They missed us. But I say it was one of the worst. I read the data of the hundreds of tonnages are being sunk every day almost. Incredible. And we got through that. As you say, min hashamayim.
It is min hashamayim.
If my father at some stage turned left instead of right, we wouldn't be here. Incredible.
You have, I see here, this is from Antwerp.
Yeah. This is an order to my father to register for military service in Antwerp. And this on the 28th of August, 1939. He wasn't fit for the army, I think, so he didn't join, but...
And this is the original...
Yeah.
'29th of August, 39. Wow.
Yeah, this is also, I think, as well.
It's, from the city of Antwerp. How did you keep all these documents?
We had a suitcase. We have a suitcase with my father had all these documents. Another thing I have is my father had a very, very efficient secretary in London, and she filed all the correspondence between him and his brothers and sisters right through the war, and even after the 1950s as well. But all the letters from 1941, more or less, They're all they're all in these files. I'm using it the whole time. I'm looking things up. It's incredible. It's like it's still talking to me. Well, this is another thing from Letchworth. This is actually a request by my father to the chief constable of the police to allow him to, as a alien, he was a foreign national. He had to be back at home every night at a certain time. And he asked, as he used to go up from Letchworth to London because his office was in London, he said sometimes I'm delayed, and he requests here that he could stay overnight, or he could, he allow him to get back later or whatever, because his business doesn't always allow him to get back in time. I even have here a Louis Chanel from 1939.
Really? Wow, that your father kept?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1939.
Yeah.
Say the first day of Shavuot.
Yeah, this is my grandfather's membership of the Diamond Club in Antwerp.
And it's dating, wow, January 1950.
And these are ration cards from Antwerp that we had. Ration cards.
This is incredible. This is the original ration. And here they would cut them out.
Yeah. This is my father's Diamond membership of Diamond Club. 1940, my father's.
This is amazing, because when you went on did they take it when they went on the ship?
They have to, they got, I think things I got things from 1932 or whatever. 1931, for some reason, I can't remember why. For some hairdresser or something.
This is the original.
Yeah, original cards.
Here's the original.
Yeah.
Joseph Freudman. Wow.
Oh, here, okay.
And you have the original postcards as well.
Yeah, of course. This by the way,
cards.
no, that's also a ration card.
Has any Holocaust Museum asked you for the items?
No, because I haven't been in touch actually with it. This was my mother, and my brother. This must have been taken around. How old could he be there? He was born in February 1940, so I mean he's about a couple of months there, I think. So that's from February or March, whatever.
This is still in Belgium,
That's in Belgium still, yeah. This was the family. This was the family of the uncle who was who died in the camps. That's his wife. There's the two twins and the boy. That boy, he was running wild with a black market and with a underground, maybe the resistance in France. He was about 14 or 15. Now, boy, 14, 15 in France at that time. Well, he was 13. Romy remembers his bar mitzvah, so he was about 14 then. That boy, 14 in the war, he was like an old man already, you know. Anyway, he got attached to a American army unit when the Americans after Normandy. He got attached when they got to Belgium as a translator, and then he was arrested for armed robbery in the port of Antwerp, and he said he's got a cousin who's in the American intelligence in Antwerp. And that was this one who I said he joined the American army. He was intelligence in there. He was looking for Nazi collaborators and Nazis, and the military police called him and said, "This boy says he's your cousin and he's in trouble. He's tried armed robbery," and so he got him off. And my father tried to get him to come to England, And as I said, he wrote us a letter from Algiers from 1946 or 7 that he's going to the Belgian Congo to find his fortune. Never heard anything from him again. Disappeared completely. I mean, Africa was a very hairy place at that time, and he disappeared completely. Anyway, don't know if we're at the stage. So we got, as I say, we got to Glasgow. We finished that part. Got to Glasgow.
Did you know any English, or did your parents know any?
My mother.
Oh, your mother knew English.
Yeah. And
but your father?
My father used to go to England on business, and he was an educated man. And in Belgium, it's pretty international. You know, he spoke French, Flemish, German, English for sure, right?
Did your parents ever tell you how they met each other?
My father came on business to London. He used to fly already in the 30s. He used to fly to London. He met her. Like my other brothers also. They met their wives on business in South Africa.
And where did they get married? Was it
in Holland, and Scheveningen. Scheveningen, which is near Antwerp. And I've even got a newspaper that the family put out for the wedding and all that. Yeah. And actually, we seem to be all pretty fast on the draw when it comes to meeting, because my father proposed to my mother when he met her on a business trip. My brothers, 2 of them did the same in South Africa.
And they did it very quickly.
Yeah, and I met my wife. The second time I went out with her, I said, I want to marry you. She said, no way. So anyway, this is the uncle who survived. And he settled in the end in Netanya.
And the one next to him?
That's my father.
That's your father with glasses.
My uncle who died was actually they were a bit familiar. They looked pretty much the same. My father and my uncle. Ferdy, my uncle was Uncle Ferdy. That's that.
And the postcard, you have a...
This another one here is from, we got for a very time from Portugal or from we got updates or something here and there from family or friends who were on their way as well. It says Senza Hotel, the park. Oh, well, this was not from my, I don't think this is from my hold on a second. It's in Yiddish. It's from Curia, 1940, 6th of November. It's from a friend, I think, not from family. We had various, we had people writing out here and there, like, there was this gentleman in Bordeaux.
From Portugal, sent to London.
Yeah, I got a lot of like that. If you want more, you can have.
To Joseph Freudman.
Yeah, but it's not from. One second now. I have to get my glass a minute.
And it's written in 1940 in Yiddish.
Yeah, they wrote down in German and Yiddish things as well. Not always Yiddish completely, but my grandfather wrote in Yiddish and Flemish and all kinds. Yeah, I'll be with you in a minute.
Here's another. Thank you. Also in Hebrew script. So it's amazing. We're going to just show to have kept these cards. It's incredible, the Russian cards.
It's not a family. He writes, Lieber Herr Freudman. So that's, he says, my dear sir, you know, Mr. Freudman. It's not family, it's something. We had a guy like in Bordeaux who wrote to us. We left 9 suitcases or something, you know, with a friend of my father in Bordeaux. And he writes, your maid, there was a maid in Antwerp. Your maid came with a friend of hers and said that we requested that she brings all the luggage to Antwerp. He gives her 9 cases and she disappeared and never saw her again. Never know what happened. I don't know the story, what happened. By the way, there's also here that I sometimes have to correct either wrong stories or people who weren't involved and heard things. Or I have a cousin here from London, who's her mother, who died recently, was 105, in good health. But she said her mother told her that before leaving Antwerp, my parents gave my youngest brother to a girl who was a working girl who worked for us, something, that she should take him on a bus to a certain place and we would meet them and so on. I said, I've never heard that. Would it be logical that we're all running away, that my parents are giving a boy to a Goisha girl to take her to God knows where, on a bus? Besides, why should we take her on a bus? We had a car, we had our own car, we didn't have to wait for transport or whatever. Anyway, so that's one story. The other story is, as I said, Linka story about warning us, everybody about, I never heard it before, and he wasn't even born, so things. But sometimes things come up, and they over the years they get repeated, and there's nothing to the backing it, you know. So not any real reason for it. This postcard was this other one. I've got lots of cards like this, which my grandfather wrote.
And it says, I thank you. I thank you.
Yeah, now he was worrying the whole time about the 2 sons who were in France and couldn't get out.
This was your grandfather?
My grandfather.
Which is the picture?
Joseph, yeah, Joseph. He the whole time worrying. He writes, yeah, Hene אנחנו דואגים עד מות. He wrote sometimes in Ivrit as well. He was from Czechia, from Czechia. הנה אנחנו דואגים עד מאוד אודות שלום בני ומשפחתו ויהודה, זה הבן השני, ומשפחת משה אפרים. Moshe Ephraim was 30, that's the one who was killed in the end. He died, he was worrying every day, I think, and he wrote cards, and he never sent them. He wrote lots of postcards, which he never sent. Send you our fondest love. Yeah, and he never sent them. All these cards were in his home. All the brothers were worried about them, and it was tragic. It was tragic that they couldn't get out. But I said he was the one who lived before in Palestine. It was even more tragic because he went back to Belgium, which was incredible. Anyway. So that's the story. We grew up in England. I don't think I was ever 100% British because we had so much influence still from the continent and so on. I never felt really 100% at home in England, except maybe for the short period of time when I said between the age of maybe 5 or 6 till my bar mitzvah, because then the bar mitzvah I was with the War of Independence and I got really. But even then, the atmosphere at home, you know, it was always a sort of a continental atmosphere more than English.
This picture, is that of the?
This is in London. That's David, my brother David's bar mitzvah.
In what year?
That was he was born in 1933, so that'd be 46, I think. Which is after we moved to London. This is the mother. This is my aunt who survived the war in Rome, in Spa as well. This was her
Spa.
husband. That was her husband who was killed.
So they were with Romeo's family?
Only at that time. Only at that time. This was my father's secretary, who
was she a Jewish secretary?
Yeah, sure. Her daughter is from Palford here, in a family Palford, the photographer. And she was part of the family almost. That's Romeo Fecht's aunt. That's his father. That's Romeo Fecht's father. These are the parents of that soldier, that officer who I told you about, that he got us these visas. He worked in the Ministry of Economic Warfare.
Amazing.
And that's his parents. Those are his parents. That's me there.
How old are you at this time?
I was 3 years younger than him, so I was 12.
10. Wow.
Yeah.
So this was, you were 10? It was
10, yes, sorry. Yeah, 10. That's my mother there.
Where's your mother?
This was my mother here. And it's my father. That's Rabbi Koppel Rosen. No, that's Rabbi Koppel Rosen. That's Rabbi Schoenfeld.
Rabbi Schoenfeld.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, this is just this history. It's incredible. And do you remember Rabbi Schoenfeld?
Sure, he was a principal of my school, Asmonean Grammar School in London. He used to come every couple of weeks, give us a big speech on Fridays or whatever.
And did you know that he was such a great hero, that he had saved so many children?
Yeah, sure. When I started school, when we left Letchworth and came to London in 1946 or 7, 3/4 of the school were kids that Schoenfeld had brought from Europe. And in my class there were Polish kids and Hungarians and French and Belgians from all over. He used to go around, follow the armies and pick up the kids, and so he was a good friend of my parents. Schoenfelds were friends with my grandmother even before my parents married, and he did a great thing there. And all these kids, afterwards they grew up made their way in life and so on. As I said, in my class, nearly all of them, not all, but at least half of them were kids who were from Europe. That was right after the war.
In which suburb did you live when you were in London?
In which
suburb? Which area?
We lived in Hampstead, which is near Hampstead Heath, which is not far from the Jewish area of Golders Green, but it wasn't only a Jewish area. Very nice part of London with a huge park called Hampstead Heath there, which is a lovely park, huge park. Yeah. This is our house one of the houses in Letchworth, by the way. This is my parents. But my father rented 3 or 4 houses during the war, and then he bought one at the end. He was very well off in the war. He came off very well because these diamonds were in great demand.
And he was able to bring the diamonds on the boat?
Yeah. This was us. This photo was taken by my American cousin. We had an American cousin who served in the Air Force. He got to England. He was serving in an air base not far from us. And he used to come to us for Shabbat and everything. He was delighted. We were delighted because he used to bring us all kinds of goodies that in England you couldn't get them anymore. And he brought us the American PX, like the shekel, American shekel. He used to bring us everything that they couldn't have. In fact, that was the aim of all the English girls, was to have an American boyfriend, that they could bring them silk stockings and perfume, and I got it as a boy. Anyway, what else? Okay, this was the bar mitzvah of Marki. That's Dark and Dasi. They were the twins of the father who was killed in Maidani.
In Maidani.
Okay, and my father, they stayed with us and in London. That's my father's brother Max, who also escaped from Antwerp. He went to the States. That's his wife Dina. She's Romeo Fecht's aunt. That's one of the things. And this another Romeo Fecht's aunt is the sister of his father, Philly, sister or cousin. Anyway, she's a Fecht. She was a Fecht. She married a Freudman. She walked out from Antwerp in the war. She had got one son still alive. We were very good friends. He's pretty ill now in London. But when the war started, when the invasion started in Antwerp, they walked out. There was 3 girls and a boy, and they walked to the coast, and they got out with a British destroyer. On a British destroyer, they got to England. Wow. And he always laughed that we had a car and a Pontiac. It took us 2 months to get there. Yeah. So that's Marky, who was in the war as well there. That's me, my mother.
Where are you?
This is Marky, that's me. That's Marky's sister, twin sister. That's again the father who was deported, who was killed. This American girl who married a cousin of mine. This is behind, we can't see his face, is my father's brother who survived in France. This was my bar mitzvah teacher, and he was a Marx teacher. And he was also a cousin of the girl who was a refugee or Kindertransport girl from Germany, who came to look after my younger brother and who stayed in our house and who became part of the family, and who married my Gemara teacher, because my father looked for a teacher for us for Gemara in the country. And there was this Latvian refugee who knew how to teach, and he didn't live with us, but he came down from London, I think, and he taught us. And one day we see him walking still then I remember, I see him walking hand in hand with Frida, with the girl who was looking after my brother. And we were all so excited that they're going to get together and all that. And they married, and they lived happily ever afterwards. So that was Frida, and her cousin was a Hebrew teacher in a school in London.
I just want to show the picture. What a lovely picture.
Yeah. This is me in the war. I was dead keen on soldiers and everything and that, and I got a cap there, a soldier's cap which my uncle bought me, and jumpers or whatever, which I used for riding, and a wooden pistol which another uncle made me, and I was all very thin. Since I paint and draw, all these are mine, right? But I stopped drawing soldiers, so after I went to the army myself, I stopped. So as I said here, that's Romy's father, right? His father and his mother. Romeo Fecht's father and mother here. Who else? This is his aunt, Ellie Fecht. Her husband was a partner with my uncles and father in Antwerp. And she was the one who walked out. That was my grandmother. This was a nurse who was also a refugee from Germany. She was a girl on her own, and we took her to look after my youngest brother. And this one, Eddie, my brother, sold her a lottery ticket for the Red Cross lottery after the end of the war, and she won.
She won, wow.
And with that money, she bought a ticket to the States. And in the States, she met somebody and married him, and lived happily ever afterwards.
That's amazing.
This was my mother. That's Dina. That's Max's wife, and that's a sister, Regina. She lived in Brazil. She moved to Brazil before the war. Her husband used to go for business between Sao Paulo and Rio, and one Friday the plane crashed. So she lived always in New York. Very nice lady. And that's Dina. That's Max's wife, and her uncle, also Fecht. She's a Fecht.
This is amazing.
That's Ellie Fecht, Dina Fecht.
Romeo's parents.
Phil Fecht, and the mother. What's her name? And forgot her name for a second. Anyway. By the way, this is my mother with the same lady here. It's by chance I didn't look at it. She's the same lady here. This is Dina. It's this one. Anyway, yeah.
That's amazing shit.
It's this one. That's my Uncle Sam. He was a fabulous man. He was a lawyer, made lots and lots of business. He was my mother's brother, and he made his money at the end of the war. with the construction of the London airport, the first airport. He wasn't a builder, but he controlled whatever. He was a millionaire several times. He had lots of funds and things that he gave. He bought a house in Telmond, the Lord Zeeves house in Telmond.
Wow.
And he died a few years away. He was a fabulous man and very, very generous. Everything that you could donate to did. But he didn't just give. He used to check what's the money going for. There's a Sabbath fund actually, which he said that they set up. Yeah. Okay. So that's a story about. I traced also what happened to all the family. I tried to see if they had any kind of coordination or some kind of meeting before they all ran away or whatever. Now, I have a letter which I know that from the letter that my father met with one of my uncles. First of all, they met near the border, near the Belgium-French border. First Shabbat, when they went out. What happened, and I couldn't understand this until I spoke to this other second cousin of mine in London, Fecht. He's pretty ill now, but he walked out. He was the one who walked out. But he knew about what was happening, about what happened at that time. I said, I can't understand something. We got to the border on Friday and couldn't get out. The French closed the border. And other people got to the border and went back home and were stuck in the war. But we got out on a Sunday. He says, yes, they opened the border again on Sunday. But so many people went back. They got to the border and they despaired that they couldn't get out. So they went home. So many of them must have got deported afterwards, got caught by the Germans.
And your family decided
now
to
we stayed. They got out. Now I know that we met a couple of brothers in the area. One of them, my father and him, they divided their assets. They had diamonds with them, the rough diamonds, and they divided it on the border. I know this because years later, after the war, some correspondence about, you owe me this or you owe me that, and they said, well, we agreed when we met on the border on this and this date, and so I know about that. But in general, so at one point there were a few together, and my mother writes, when we met this, but we couldn't take them with us in the car because there was no room, you know. So I know also that the one who died in the end, he was at one point, they were together with him and he didn't have a car apparently, or I don't know what, so I don't know why exactly he didn't move on, but he stayed in Belgium. The cousins, all of them, they all dispersed. Some got out, I say, finally through the Portuguese consul in Bordeaux. Then they got onto either a boat or they flew out. As I say, one or two were in Portugal when we were still there, and we didn't know, one from the other didn't know that they were there. Only one brother, in fact, in the end was, well, but I did grow up with hearing all the whole time about, oh, this and this friend, they were taken by the Germans, or this and one disappeared, or this and that. This was a general part of our lives at that time, who survived and who didn't survive. By the way, also in England, as I said, one bomb, the dangers weren't finished quite. You still were, as a general British population, right? I mean, there was terrible bombing in London and other places and so on. We moved out, as I say, to areas which were quiet, which didn't really have. I still remember seeing German and Italian prisoners of war working in the fields. They used to wear their uniforms, but they had a big yellow circle on their backs, right? They were prisoners. I didn't meet much anti-Semitism as such. Once in school, there was a Czech non-Jewish gym teacher who made some remark about Jews and so on, which my father was very quick to go and complain and so on, so we didn't really have any problems with that. But growing up in the war, it leaves something on you. First of all, I don't know exactly what the whole escape left in my soul. I don't know. It certainly left something. Secondly, the war itself. I used to draw only soldiers, fighting and soldiers and that. Say since I went to the army, I stopped drawing soldiers completely almost. I drew British soldiers, which is, I must be one of the last people in this area who would draw. It was a ceremony in memory of First World War and in Belgium, near Belgium, and there was a British and Scottish soldier there. I painted the occasion. Anyway, but as such, a war, during the war and the time, I only drew the war. I only drew soldiers. We lived in Letchworth on one of the roads where there used to be huge convoys going of the British Army, and before Normandy, I remember Normandy invasion, there were lots and lots of roadside stores for shells and for cars, for vehicles, God knows, all along the roads. And then it was one of the main thoroughfare for convoys of American Army, especially. I remember Negro drivers, and all the drivers were Negroes. And long convoys, to get off the road, to get across the road was a problem sometimes.
And the war, did your family, your father, did he, because of his efforts, he managed to bring people to England?
How do you mean?
To save family members?
He tried to save the fact that, yes, they were trying, but it was very difficult. Look, my two uncles, we have correspondence from one of them who's using a non-Jewish name and non-Jewish identity the whole time, right? He survived, he managed to survive. And the other one didn't stay in France, he went back to Belgium or something. He was caught in Belgium, but from there they took him. We have the details of the convoy that he was on.
But were your parents able to sponsor anyone to come to England?
He didn't sponsor people. What do you mean by sponsoring?
Or that
they tried to get my cousins, as we said, the kids. Yeah. We got, as I said, in the end we got permission to bring them, and it was too late. The Germans invaded it, moved down into the south of France. And,
that must have been heartbreaking.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking, yeah. You didn't have anything of sponsoring. I mean, I don't know what happened, how they used to send like a kinder transport. That was before the war. There wasn't a war. War wasn't on yet. So what could you do? You could either work through the Red Cross. The American consuls were in France until '42, until Japanese, until Pearl Harbor or whatever. And so they had contact with the American consul in south of France. But after that, there was no possibility. You couldn't have it. What could you do?
I think what most probably, your father was very close to Rabbi Schoenfeld.
Yeah, but Schoenfeld was only active after the Normandy invasion, when the Allied armies invaded Europe. He could go in the wake of the soldiers and pick up the Jewish children. But when it was in German occupation, he couldn't do anything.
But he managed to bring, even before the war, he brought
you could bring out before, and you could bring out during when you were in Allied occupied areas. But you couldn't do it when the Nazis were in the areas where the Nazis were.
Sure, no.
In the war itself. Maybe before the war you could still do some deals with the Germans, and the people did get out. I'll tell you something, not to do with my family, but I have a program in the military prisons. I've done it now for maybe 15 years or so, to be listening ear to soldiers in the prisons. I also give an art workshop, and I also raised a group of ex-colleagues who we interviewed the soldiers and recommended what to do with them and so on, together with the unit in the army which is there to deal with the improving the loss of the prisoners. And One second. What did I get into there? How did I get onto that? 1 second. How did I get onto this? From what did I jump? I jumped to something. Turn off your camera a minute because
No, it's just.
I'm sitting down. Well, why did I suddenly talk about the soldiers? I started on something of helping. I don't know, something. I forgot now.
No, it's. I think what happened with Rabbi Schoenfeld, he needed finances also because he brought a lot of children, and he did it nearly single-handedly. But he did have people that.
I know what. I'll go back a minute. Well, I worked with an excellent officer, a lady in a military prison, and one day we talked and so on, and I see also a signpost in Rishon with his name. And I said, well, you know, what's with the old grandfather? He was from a revisionist in Czechoslovakia. As a boy of a student or something of 19 something, he met with Eichmann and with and he negotiated with Eichmann and also with Heydrich. Heydrich was even worse than Eichmann. It was the highest Gauleiter. And this was before, although this was before they were murdering all the Jews. I mean, not before, it was before the Wannsee. And he bargained with them to get Jews out. He was one of the heads of the revisionists in Czechoslovakia. He bargained to get them out on the Danube with boats, which he did. To take hundreds of Jews from there, bargained with them in the war, and they got out through Romania in the end, and took them out on the Danube. So you could do some negotiating, but with Schoenfeld, I don't think it was a problem. Money you could always get, and there was no problem there. The problem was how could you contact? You know, he couldn't do it while they were in the actual occupied areas. He got all these kids out either before or with the armies, with the Allied armies. He got them out because you couldn't do it otherwise. He was great. He was really great. Where's my? Where did I put my? I heard it, but
I just want to thank you, and I just want to ask you, when you speak to your children, and the grandchildren, what message do you impart onto them? I mean, you've been through so much, and you've seen so much, and you've gone through.
I first of all, I don't know about first. A Jew staying faithful. That's us. Israel is essential for us, and we can only rely on us and ourselves, and not on any of the goyim. And first of all, I say to give as much faith with the Jewish tradition, Jewish way of life, and I see it as Israel as being a essential part of it. And I don't understand Jews who can pray 3 times a day abroad and say we go to Israel and Jerusalem next year and that, and they never move themselves, and they can come. The minute you say to a Jew he's forbidden to go to Israel, they'll start a whole movement of resistance, but if you give them a ticket free, they won't come. So that's something in the Shema, but I think I give that to the family.
It's wonderful.
And for me, this is the only place. It's the only place.
I just want to thank you. It will be a minute, but wow. Okay, this has been absolutely amazing, and I'm so grateful to you.
That's all right.
Your inspiration. You are really the youngest 85-year-old I have ever met in my life, and I've met a lot of people, but you are such an inspiration to you're incredible, and the story, and that your family kept all these documents.
Yes.
You know, if you think they were escaping.
Yeah, that's amazing what they do.
And to keep, you know, most people would throw over all the, but they kept all the documents. They kept all the. It's unbelievable.
I had this suitcase which they'd had with them. It's fallen to pieces now, but we still keep it together.
And the photographs. This is seeing history You're seeing real history in front of our eyes.
Yes.
To keep the ration book, you know, it's just amazing. But I'm so grateful to you, and your story is amazing. And we go back with your family many, many years, and it really has been the greatest honor and privilege.
I want to say that history isn't just history. It keeps up with you the whole time. It comes back to me on so many different things. You know, things from the past, not just this thing, but military service, or I served 35 years for the government in Israel and abroad, and the things keep on coming back. You never get really.
And look, you had that flashback, just...
That flashback was incredible.
It's like,
and I didn't invent it. It was
you had miracles. You really did. And what amazing parents you had. That they had that they saw the writing on the wall in a way, and that the miracles that people would stop them and ask them.
Friday afternoon to get up and go.
It's incredible. Yeah. They could have said, we'll go after Sunday, after Shabbat, but it would have been too late.
I met Belgians who that's what happened. They said they'll wait till after Shabbat, and they were caught. They couldn't get out.
Well, you should just have mazel and bracha and maybe stream in good health.
Okay, good.
And this has been absolutely unbelievable.
Can I give you something to drink?
That's good. I'm so grateful to you, and thank you so much.
So what are you going to do with that?
No, I think this is... It is so amazing that people should watch this, and you know that you've kept this history, and it's just so inspirational for everyone. Thank you so much. This is a picture of your wife's family.
My wife's family from Germany. Here's all the names of them. Okay, they're all identified here. It was from 1910, Golden Wedding of 1910.
And where did it take place?
In Germany. This was in not one of the big cities. It was they lived out in. This is in Bad Margareten, Golden Wedding. Bad Margareten, but they lived in. They lived actually in this. The father was from this land. The mother was from Plauen.
And was
the father was from, I forgot the name, but this is a painting from the town where you were.
And this is, it was also the Adler family.
This is from my father-in-law's town.
In Germany.
And you saw that event from 1910.
Yeah. And there were Adlers.
Can you reach up to that cup? Can you get up to that cup?
This one over here?
Goldene Hochzeit, 1910.
Wow.
Großladen is from that event. And this we use in the bris of my grandchild recently.
Gee, this is amazing.
Excuse me a minute, because you called me twice now.
Absolutely incredible.
In a later stage in my life, I worked for Israeli security and defense, and at some time I also took part, or had a part, in hunting Nazis, and particularly one pretty high up. Although we didn't manage to eliminate him, we managed to harm him pretty badly. And here and there I had part in trying to bring them to justice or whatever. And I also thought it's funny, it's odd how life changes, that I, as a refugee escaping from the Nazis, had a hand in getting revenge or giving justice. Another little anecdote to say how life has changed. At one stage I had to go onto a boat in Haifa Harbour to meet somebody, and I went with, I coordinated this with a security officer of the harbour, who turned out was a refugee from Germany himself. and I had to go on board to meet somebody with in the bridge, the captain's bridge actually. And I got on, and I had to walk along the whole of the boat, along the passageways, and the people that were waiting to get off the boat, and they had all their luggage already in the corridors, and I was walking along, and I was saying, excuse me, because I had to walk from where I got on to the front of the boat where the captain's bridge was. And I passed one guy, and he says to me, Scheißdreck. Scheißdreck in German. This big German guy. I said, Scheißdreck? Scheißdreck means shit, you're a big shit.
Wow.
I said, Scheißdreck? Say once more, you won't get off this boat. Here's all these big Germans, and they come down like this. I said, wow, life has changed if I done it. But afterwards I told the security officer about it. He said, why didn't you tell me? I wouldn't let him get off the boat at all.
Wow.
Just to show. Yeah.
Can I ask, is it confidential who the Nazi was?
Yeah, he lived in an Arab country actually. He was under the shelter of an Arab regime.
Wow.
But he got damaged, but he didn't get, it wasn't finished entirely. Anyway, yeah. I also worked for a while in with the department that we, in general, we were not so much anymore. The state of Israel had limited financing, let's say, to go and hunt all the Nazis, unfortunately. But we did get a lot of coordination of getting evidence and material to prosecutors in the different countries. So like in Germany and in South America or in the States or whatever, and the British. And we got a lot of documented, got a lot of information for these about Nazi war criminals and so on. So it was a period of time when I was involved in that as well, quite a while. I always was sorry that we couldn't really bring them all to justice, because there were really some, one or two in our history actually, not real criminals, maybe not the worst. We used some of them, or they cooperated with us for intelligence sometimes, but in general, we didn't really work with Nazis as such. Yeah.
But having been a survivor and then having...
Yes,
that's amazing.
Actually, well, one or two of my co-workers were in the same case. One lady, in fact, was sent to Poland. She was a refugee, a family of refugees from Poland, and she was sent to Poland to in the prosecution of a Nazi war criminal.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What a family story. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.